Welcome to the Dr. Leaf Show, and I am so excited to have a very special guest with us today, Elise Loehnen, who has been on the show before, and she's amazing. She's written a fantastic book, and you've got a workbook out now. She talks about the 7 deadly sins, and I know that immediately got your attention, the 7 deadly sins, but specifically how they apply to how women function in society. So Elise, welcome back, and I can't wait to dive in again to this topic in even more depth.
Thank you for having me. It is so fun to talk to you always.
I love it. We always have great conversations. So, well, let's just for those listeners that don't know much about you, just to tell them who you are, what you do, and why you wrote this book.
Yeah. So I'm an author and a podcast host. I have a show called Pulling the Thread, which you also will be on. And prior to, well, I've always written books. I've lived as a ghostwriter, which is sort of an interesting career path that I write about in my own book as well, because I love hiding behind other people and shaping and pushing their ideas out into the world. It's a lot easier than standing for yourself. And I was a longtime magazine writer and editor and working both in magazines at Condé Nast and also online. And so I've been thinking about ideas and writing and editing for, I guess, more than 20 years at this point. I can't believe it. I still think do you think of yourself as young? I have sort
20,
of that
yeah,
age.
20.
Yeah.
I know, and I have to say, I've been in the field for 40 years. I think, oh my gosh,
I
I'm
know.
old. I don't
It's
feel
so,
old.
yeah. I still feel like a precocious teenager and I still feel like I must be the youngest person here. And then I realize, no, I'm, a decade
I know.
older
I
than
sort of think
everyone
that
else.
exactly. When my mom was this age, I used to think she was kind of old, and now I'm this age.
I know.
It's one
It's
of those things.
terrifying.
Oh, it is. It is. It's funny. Okay, so you wrote this book, 7 Deadly Sins, and tell us a little bit about why you wrote that
Yeah.
book.
So having written so many books, finally, my agent was like, what are you doing? Like, what is this compulsion that you have? Why would you never write your own book? And of course, I protested and I said, I don't really know I don't have any imagination. I don't have anything to say. And she essentially called me to the mat and was like, this is something you need to take to therapy, clearly, but your next book needs to be your own. I mean, I've written, I think, 16 books at this point.
Wow.
And, yeah. And the genesis for this book I started thinking about it in really 2017, 2018. And what I wanted to explore, because I knew I needed a really big question, was what is this inner compulsion that I feel to be good, quote unquote, and to perform my goodness in the world, to be a good mother, a good friend, a good partner, to be essentially never selfish, but selfless. And simultaneously, what's happening amongst women where we are so incredibly hard on each other, often using sort of the lash of goodness in order to go after each other and police each other. And I would find myself doing that as well. And obviously at this point we were living in Trump's Trump won.
Yeah.
And just feeling like, what is happening amongst us that we cannot get on side with each other? There's so much internalized patriarchy in each other, and I could find it easily in myself. And I really wanted to understand what that was. And why is this such a guiding principle for women? This idea of sort of quote unquote goodness. Whereas for men, they can do any sort of terrible thing, right? And we revere them. They are not conditioned for goodness. They are conditioned for power. Whereas reputational harm for women around goodness is our kryptonite. And you just, look all over our culture and all you have to do is say bad person, toxic coworker, bully, whatever it is, that's enough to destroy a woman. So I really wanted to understand, like, where did that come from? What is that?
Okay, so tell us the answers.
So
people are going to get the book, but tell us the answers.
Yeah. So essentially, I wanted to understand, okay, what is this part of me that will never be thin enough, will never be financially secure, in part because I am so uncomfortable talking about money. What is this part of me that feels like I have to subjugate everything I want to other people's needs, whereas my husband is not conditioned in this way at all? What is it in me that feels like I need to be sexy but not sexual, or desirable but not desiring, etc.? I started writing this down, the way that I was keeping myself constrained and tight and small. And as I looked at this list, I realized that it mapped onto, as you mentioned, the 7 deadly sins, which are sloth, pride, envy, greed, gluttony, lust, and anger or wrath. Because that's the other thing, Caroline, you are not allowed, as a woman, as a good woman, you're not allowed to really be angry. That would be hysterical, right? You can sometimes be mad on behalf of other people, but never on behalf of yourself.
Exactly.
As Harriet Lerner points out, even the epithets that we have for an angry an angry man, which are, if I'm allowed to say them, bastard and son of a bitch, put the blame on the woman. Is that interesting? But we have like a million words to describe a shrew, a castigating, demonic, hysterical woman.
Good, not being a good girl and all those things. Yeah. It's just,
It's pernicious.
crazy.
And so it maps to the 7 deadly sins, which I learned about in the movie Seven. And I was like, well, it's because I wasn't raised in a Christian or Catholic house. So that's why I don't know what these sins are. Where are they in the New Testament? Where are they in the Bible? And I realized they're not in the Bible. They never appear in the Bible. They came out of the Egyptian desert in the 4th century at the hands of a monk named Evagrius Ponticus. And he called them 8 demonic thoughts, but demonic meaning distracting, like the thoughts that would keep you out of prayer. He's also credited as an early father of the Enneagram. And then this little chapbook made its way through the desert. And then in 590, Pope Gregory I, in a homily, said Mary Magdalene who's described in the New Testament as the one from whom Jesus cast 7 demons. He said, these are the demons, the 7 cardinal vices. And Mary Magdalene is the same woman who anoints Jesus's feet with her hair. And that woman is a penitent prostitute. And that's when that started.
Wow.
He sort of made it all up.
So interesting.
Isn't it interesting? And then that's the reputation that she had until the 80s. But I thought of her as that she was a prostitute. That had reached me. I'm sure most people, 5% of people still think she was a prostitute. Isn't that wild?
It's crazy. I mean, you're just saying all these things, and just that the history behind it is just how like myth builds up generation after generation after generation and creates the myths by which we look at each other or look at women or whatever. In this case, it's specifically looking at women.
Yeah. And it very much aligns with your work in the sense that these are stories that are passed down to us about what a good woman is and how a good woman performs her goodness in the world. And we inherit them as truth, as biological, natural truth, when really it's culture, right?
It's culture.
We don't know who we are sort of at our barest biological nature. This is just the way that we've acculturated women in a patriarchy and said, this is the standard and this is what you need to achieve. And then we internalize it, and it's completely not in our conscious minds that we're playing this out. And then we police each other when we sort of move from the script as well. Like, how dare you? I would never let myself do that. Get back in line. It's not conscious. Yeah.
It's really a pattern that's wired in. So people just get immersed in that, and it builds, we receive it with our mind and we wire it in, and it's in our pattern. And do you think about it all the time? So it grows and becomes strong. And then it's, as you say, it's not questioned until someone does come along and question it. And when they do question it, then they are, as you say, vilified by the patriarchy, by other women. I mean, I've heard so many times when because I teach all over the place and do keynotes in various different audiences, and some of them are church audiences. And there's been comments like, who's wearing the pants? It's like nasty, but there would never be that's a woman who's maybe more dominant, or whereas with a man, that's great. But with a woman, it's like a criticism. It's like pulling her down,
And it's an abomination because we've also been fed this story that was really popularized in the 1960s at this symposium where they put forward this myth about man the hunter. And they ignored all the anthropological evidence that suggests that in our prehistory, we were far more affiliative. And they created a story that fit the times about how valiant men are and have always been hunting and procuring meat and allowing our brains to expand, while women were sort of in the cave tending to the children and hoping to be protected. And the reality is that men and women both hunted. Women were responsible for procuring a majority of the calories through foraging and often different forms of hunting, like smaller game. Men were more, when they look at skeletal remains and wear patterns, men often hunted with a spear, whereas women used like bows and arrows and knives. But we were out there battling it out for our survival as well, which obviously makes sense, right? Um,
Totally.
so
Yeah.
yeah, but we love this idea of, hashtag trad wife
Yeah.
and playing out this idea, this very patriarchal idea of like, this is naturally what women do, and naturally what men do is go out and be valiant. And it's like, no, everyone did everything, you know?
Everyone did everything, and everyone did everything when they had to do, because you had to survive. But it's just so crazy how it becomes, how something, a myth becomes engendered into culture, and how it literally passes through as an epigenome. And if that
Yeah.
doesn't change it, and then people think, well, we've been doing it like this, so it must be right. Whereas it's not correct. I mean, this is not related to exactly to what you teach on women, but a concept that in my field, 21-day myth, the 21 takes 21 days to build a habit. There was no science behind it. It was just a story from the 60s. Once again, the narrative that passes down and gets, people just don't question, and and what I love about your work is that you are making people question this. Have you had resistance from the people in the church?
I don't know how many of them have read my book. Some people I think have, like, I love Father Richard Rohr and Center for Action and Contemplation, which
Hmm.
he built, and they're on more progressive Christian organization, and he loves the Enneagram, and I think they've been interested in what I've been up to. But I think a lot of people see the book, and it's interesting because the paperback comes out with the workbook in August, and it's on our best behavior, the 7 deadly sins and the price women pay to be good. And we're taking the 7 deadly sins off the paperback because I think a lot of people see it and they think that I am going to denounce or challenge their religious beliefs,
And they won't
and they
read it.
don't want to get into it. And I think men also have been
Mm.
scared of the book because they think that I'm blaming and finger pointing, but not at all. Actually, when men read the book, they love the book because they're like, I actually now understand the psychology of my mother and my sisters and my partner if they're married. Now I understand it because I've been trying to be sort of a good partner and ally, and I find like I don't quite understand. They don't understand the beasts that they're battling.
Yeah, it's almost like they instinctively and intuitively know it's not right, but
Yeah.
yet that's what you do,
Well,
that's the women are the weaker sex and the women stay at home. And I mean, there's just
yeah.
there's a guy who's, and I'm not going to mention the name, but there's one of these bros, these a lot of them out there, and has quite a big following. And I mean, just today put out something on social media about the role of the trad wife and what they're supposed to do, and if you don't do that, and that's, I was listening to some of these things that I mean, you know what I'm talking about. They're all
Yeah.
over the place. You
Yes.
think, really, that in this day and age people still think like that? But
Yes.
they do. They do. I mean, I
Well,
shouldn't be surprised when I go to these churches and things that we see. There's a lot of challenge and kickback from this kind of thing.
yeah. And wouldn't it be convenient? Like, wouldn't we all like to have a wife at home propping up our lives and dreams in that way that I think a lot of people have become accustomed or want to believe is normal or right?
Hmm.
And what I hear, and my husband, I'll use him as an example, is I, throughout our marriage have carried a lot of anger at him because it's not equitable. And I'm the primary
Mm.
breadwinner. He also works full time. And of course, I just do way more than he does in regards to the kids and the house. And he's a great dad, but I
Yeah.
am on it and I am super competent and super fast. And I learned it
Hmm.
from my mother. Right. And a couple of years ago, but I've been sort of full of resentment and rage at the inequity that I experience in my
Hmm.
own partnership. And some of it is valid, like our kids go
Yeah.
to a progressive school and they are constantly asking me to volunteer and me to do things. And they do not ask the fathers, as far as I can tell, at the same rate, nor do they
Gosh. Mhm.
do that work. But a couple of years ago, I fell off a horse and I broke my neck. And it was
Wow.
after my book was actually out. So it was interesting
Sure.
experience. And I couldn't do anything for I was completely fine. It was a
Wow.
miracle. I just had to wear a brace and I
I was
wasn't
just gonna
allowed to
say,
drive.
wow.
I know I got really lucky. Lift anything, drive, do things like laundry, make dinner. And so I had to sit for 6 weeks
Mm.
and it was so uncomfortable and it was really an important experience for me because I realized that it's not my husband saying what's for dinner and it better be well balanced and nutritious and I need you to clean the kitchen. This is all internal. This is all
It's
me
coming from his,
performing.
yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't care. He was thrilled to order dinner every single night for 6 weeks. But for me, I was like, I'm failing according to my own standards of what it
Amazing.
is to be a good mother and a good wife. And so to see it, to get a front row seat
Mm.
to it was so helpful.
Wow, because that happened since I last interviewed you, and so that's really interesting that you, as you say, you got a front row seat to your own,
Yeah.
to what we, you don't even realize it's in you. You know, as I mean, I've listened to you before, I've read your book. Just the you don't realize how ingrained some of those things are.
Yeah.
So what do you tell women to do? How do you change
Yeah.
this pattern? What are
Well,
the things?
yeah. So that's why we decided, all right, my editor and I decided to create this workbook, which is called Choosing Wholeness Over Goodness, which is a great Carl Jung quote. I'd rather be whole than good.
I love it.
And because essentially in honor best behavior, explicating and illustrating the way that all of
Yeah.
these things show up and hold us all in our thrall and how we see it as normal behavior rather than sort of this forced performance. And every time I went out to talk about the book and to talk to women, the question was, well, okay, like, so what do we do? And so I worked with my friend Courtney Smith, who's an incredible coach. She actually coaches the Enneagram partly, and there's this extreme Venn diagram of our interests, and we're very complementary. And we created, using a lot of the tools that she uses with groups, this whole process where you essentially make your unconscious stories conscious and you work in each sin bucket. And then you make that story really, really big. So, one of my stories for sloth is I'm the only one who can do it right. So, I need to do it all.
Mm-hmm.
So then you take it, you get it out on the page. You're like, oh, yeah, that's true. I believe in that. And it's gotten me really far because this is connected, obviously, to our survival in some way, right? It's wired deeply into us. And then you take through the process, you give it a persona, you teach a class to young college graduates about how to make your story true for them as well. And when you start doing these actions, you
Yeah.
realize how crazy it is, how it's a reasonable thing to do, but sort of
Mhm.
how much work you're doing to keep that story alive and keep that story core to how you're moving throughout the world. So my story, I'm the only one who can do it right, so I should do it all. Try and reinforce that story in all of my behavior all the time by rushing to do things before my husband can do them, by not delegating anything to anyone,
Mhm.
by doing everything perfectly, right? Just so I can feel sort of self-soothed by my own excellence at the details, by not hiring an assistant, by, all the things. And I've
Mhm.
done it throughout my career, trying to be sort of a solo operator rather than a delegator. I don't know what it does for me except confirm this story that I am really good at the details. And meanwhile, I look at my life, I'm like, none of the details have made a meaningful impact to my message, right? I'm just driving
Mhm.
myself crazy.
There you go. Just driving yourself. Good description. Just it's just too much. It's too much
Yeah.
for one person. And that drive. Did you get to the root of where that came from?
I think part of it was watching my mom, who is incredibly competent. So part of it was modeling from her. And then it was, with all of our stories, and again, this gets into your work and the way that we're
Yeah.
wired, deep, deep fear, right? Fear of loss
Mm.
of control, fear of loss of approval, fear of loss of safety and security. So for me, the way that I
Mm.
manage my existential anxiety and my fear about the world and everything I can't control is by doing everything myself and having it all at my fingertips. And
Mm.
it'd be more productive, as I've come to understand through writing this book and working on this workbook, to sort of work on the underlying fear and to let the story, to thank the story for all that it's done for me and then to let it go. It's hard.
Yeah, that's really difficult, especially when it's and when something's so wired into the mind brain body network that has then come through generations. So it starts off as a network in our mind brain and body, and then we live and we reinforce, and whatever you think about the most grows. So we, even if it's not right, it feels right because
Yeah.
that's where. So to go down and deconstruct it in that way, and then reconstruct it,
Yeah.
and to remember how you were, and to, to get a new way of playing it out into your future is not an easy task to do, especially when you've got so many voices around you shouting, "But now you that aggressive one, or you that this one, or you that dominating woman," or as you say, the guys can do it and they're seen as wonderful. But if a woman is dominant, she's seen as aggressive or hysterical or loud or
Yeah.
whatever, all the different terminology that's used. And to be able to cut through those voices and not hear them and stand up for what you, fortunately, are, your children might, yeah, I've got young adults, they're growing up in an environment where they can speak up against this. But if I think of when I was back at going choosing my degree, what I was going to, and I always wanted to be a neurosurgeon. That was my goal. And I remember my mom saying, "You need to go and sit with these." And I'm really not running my mom down. It was what she did with the best with what she could do at the time. As we all know, she grew up in this environment. And as you were talking, it reminded me of that story of, here I'm deciding, determined to get into neurosurgery, and I got into medicine. I got into three different universities, top universities. I was accepted on my way to do medicine. And I remember my mom saying to me, "Caroline, that's not a job for women. How are
Mm.
you going to be at home bringing up your children? You need to be at home. You need to be there. You're the mother, you're the cook, all those things that you write about in your book." And that's because she got that, and her mother, and it just came through. And, so I didn't end up doing medicine, but I ended up doing an even more difficult degree because it was a combination of medicine plus other stuff. But I remember my mom taking me to people and saying, "Let's go talk to her about this. Is a great job that you could do, and you could still have children, and you could do it in the mornings while your children are at school. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about that conditioning." And I did rebel against that. I did go and end up doing what I wanted to do, and went on a path and landed up where I am now. And she's very proud of me, obviously. But that conversation, I'd forgotten about that conversation until you actually brought this up now today.
Mm.
So, and that
Yeah.
really drove. And I've always felt, Elise, all these years, I still think so many times I was going to go back and do medicine. And even now, I often think, would I go back and, I'm in my 60s, I'm 61 now. I would go back and study medicine just because it's something that it was, don't want to practice, but it was my first love. And it
Yeah.
was my first fascination. And I feel like I got stopped because of what women should do. So there's a classic case in point. So watch the space. Maybe next time you talk to me, I'm on the way to getting another degree.
Well, it sounds like it felt like a vocation, right? Like an actual
Yeah.
calling, something calling to you. Yeah, I think, and I write a fair amount about my mom, and a lot of the press when I first book came out was about my mom, and I wrote a New York Times op-ed about maternal ambivalence and normalizing that because my mom,
So good.
and I'm grateful to her for this because
Yeah.
my mom was very open about the ambivalence she felt about being a mother, in part because she grew up, she's 75 now, and she came of age during second wave feminism, right at that point
Mm.
where some women were really trying to do something with their lives, and she chose safety, security, and married my father. They met at the Mayo Clinic. My father's a physician. My mom was a nurse, and signed up for his dream, even though it wasn't her dream, but it felt like
Mm.
the responsible, safe option. My mom grew up in a lot of scarcity and is the oldest of seven. And my dad's very cute too, to be fair. But she never really wanted to have kids. And so the piece that I wrote was about the way that culturally we conflate being a mother and loving, we conflate loving your children with loving being a mother. And I think for a lot
Mm.
of women, you can love your children and hate the role, and particularly the way that it's performed it's May, we're speaking in May, and it's
Expectation.
a nightmare. I hate being a
Mm.
mom right now, not because I don't adore my children, but the
Pressure.
stupid stuff that we're being called to do right now is
It's ridiculous.
enraging.
No,
Enraging. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And not the good use of your time or my time. And my kids don't care. Like, that's the other thing. So much of, I
So,
think, the
mm,
performative motherhood comes out around things that do not affect my children. They're not conscious of, and they don't care about, right? They don't care if I go to the gala. They don't care if I assemble gift bags for graduation. I don't know why these kids are
exactly.
getting gift bags. Anyway, sorry, excuse my rant, but
I get that. I remember when my kids were at school, because I've always worked. I mean, I'm a working mom.
yeah,
I've been there as much as I can for them and at their games and all that kind of thing. And I remember some mothers at some of the schools saying, shame, I'm so sorry that you can't be, kind of like looking down. You're not fulfilling your role, real criticism in that sense. And I'll never forget my son, who actually works for me. He's actually my podcast producer and editor. He actually said to me the one time, I'm so glad that you work, because you'd be awful. I'm paraphrasing, but you'd be awful just being at home, bored, being a mom. I like it that you're out there doing your own thing and being stimulated. That's a paraphrase, but it's something that really gave me permission. It's like my kids gave me permission to literally be what I knew I had to be, which was a
yeah,
very interesting situation. But the criticism, I mean, I don't know if you've
yeah.
had this, but I have had so much over the years as my children grew up from school.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's a lot of undiagnosed envy. And then I think there's, again, this ambivalence and a huge amount of anxiety. And so what happens amongst women is we sort of are projecting it and sending it to each other because we can't contain it. And so I get very triggered by anyone who's making me feel like I'm not doing enough to celebrate being a mom. And then on the reverse, I think that other
Mm.
women feel ashamed that they aren't doing quote unquote more with their lives and maybe their pedigreed educations. And so we all just
Yeah.
end up feeling terrible.
Mm.
And in reality, there is no, this doesn't happen amongst men at all.
No.
And so the more we can become conscious of what's happening, I think the more we can give ourselves grace, give each other grace, and let this go. Similarly, it sounds
Mhm.
like you're the same. One of the things that I do with my kids, and I heard actually Jamie Lee Curtis, I just saw her on social media talking about this, how one of her big regrets is that
Yeah.
she pretended like she had to work in order to survive, to support the family, which is true. But she's said that she never said, I actually really want to, and I really enjoy my job. I say that to my kids
So
all the
interesting.
time. Like, I love my work. I love you and I love my work. And I
And they're
miss
not in
you when I'm not
conflict.
here. Yeah.
They're not in conflict. So loving your work makes you a better and healthier mom. And because you first and foremost, Elise,
Yeah.
and then wife and mother and so on. But this whole thing of you've got to sacrifice yourself is not healthy, because that's not how we function. We don't do well, any whatever gender. That isn't how we
No.
function. First and foremost, you've got to be yourself. You've got to be
Yes.
you, and then you can
It's so
function.
hard.
Well, it is in a society that has set the rules that, thank goodness, we're starting to break. So hopefully, my grandchildren and your children are going to have a different, but they're still going to fight this. It's going to be many years of fighting patriarchy, because it's so established.
Yeah. And I think that thinking about, you have a son, I have two boys, and one of the things that I think we've also really gotten wrong, and which is why I think the book is really good for men to read.
Mm.
I wish I could write sort of the corollary for men. Some of my dad's friends actually asked me to, and I felt like I
That's a
don't
great
know
idea.
enough about that experience to write it, what it is to be conditioned for power, where, well, this is interesting actually. So, as I mentioned,
Yeah.
Evagrius Ponticus, he wrote down these 8 demonic thoughts, and the 8th was sadness, and it was dropped from the list when they became the 7 cardinal vices. And so in my book, I
Wow.
include a chapter on sadness, which is mostly about men and what happens in a culture where we sever boys and men from their feelings and acculturate them to be sort of strong and
Mhm.
never weak, never quote unquote feminine, never feeling, and sort of the chaos that then wreaks on society when you have these wounded boys becoming wounding men, to quote therapist
Yeah.
Terry Real.
Yeah.
And so I think about it with my boys. I think, and we see this all over the place, patriarchy, as much as it theoretically benefits boys and men, I think is soul murder in a lot of ways. And
Mm.
men are really struggling. When you look at deaths of
Mhm.
despair and rates of
Oh, yeah.
suicidality, and yeah, women have, like, we've learned how to survive and somewhat thrive in this world that's not built for us. But boys and men, particularly poor boys, boys of color, are really struggling. I think all men are struggling. I think it is to be
Mm.
divorced from your feelings as a way of life, as many men are, is living at half mast.
Of course it is. It's once again comes back to the point that it's regardless of gender, it's first and foremost you, and it's something that I've written books about it as well. I've had a book called The Perfect You, but the concept basically essentially is that you are first and foremost you. And until you are developed,
Yeah.
whatever you do, whatever you, it's like then it only follows what gender you are. It's first and foremost, it's you. And we don't focus enough on you as opposed, well, the I, who am I
Yeah.
kind of thing. And that creates this. And then also to your point about men, I think it would be a really interesting book for you to write. But it's so true because look at the kind of comments that are made. Oh, you're playing tennis like a girl,
I
or
know.
you don't cry like a girl. It's like so derogatory, and it's so disruptive, and it's so distorted. And
Yeah.
that's, as you say, that's what they've got this and from a psychoneurobiological perspective, those patterns that have gone through the generations are actually creating damage in the mind brain body network. So those are distorted. I've got my little toxic tree here. For those of you that are just listening, I'm holding up a toxic tree, and I use that to represent an unhealthy thought pattern, and that's just in the brain.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like in the brain. It's throughout the entire body, and then that's only 1%. There's the mind too. But the point being is that these thought patterns that you've identified in your book and that you speak about in male and female are distortions. So they're creating inflammatory responses in the brain and the body. They're not good. Our body's wired for love, and that's not love. So this
Yeah.
is really something that needs to be addressed by society. Very, very
Yeah.
relevant
It's
information.
so interesting looking at that toxic thought tree too, and just thinking about boys and crying. My boys, the one thing I care about I mean, not the one thing, but one of the things I really
Yeah,
care
one of the
about as
things.
their
Yeah,
mother is to keep them in their feelings and to
yeah,
not shame or diagnose or try to move them out of their feelings.
so good.
Sometimes it goes on a little long. My oldest can be slightly manipulative, where I'm like, if I start laughing, he starts laughing
Yeah,
during a dramatic bout. But what's interesting is watching my husband, who had a very patriarchal father, and he gets so anxious when the boys cry, and it's like he just wants to move them out of it as fast as possible. He kind of has to leave the room. But so thinking of those toxic thought
yeah.
trees, it's like for him, the amount of anxiety that it generates in like, you are not allowed to do that. Do not do that. Stop.
Isn't that
Lock it
crazy?
down. Whereas I obviously am not triggered by it at all. It's really interesting to watch, actually.
That's such an interesting point you raise because my husband's 9 years older than me, and that's exactly what happened in our household until I literally had to. This has got to stop. My son can cry as much as the girls can cry. We've got 3 girls and 1 boy, and that's something that had to. And I mean, for him, it was like, but isn't that what's done? No, it's not what's done. Now it's so radically different. I mean, we've been married nearly 40 years. But yeah, you're quite right. That was quite a thing when we first, brought up our son was young and he would cry.
Yeah.
It just shows you, and that's all over the place. Men don't cry. I mean, that's a
Yep.
statement that people make. I mean, there's so many of these little phrases that just pop out of people's mouths without even questioning them.
Yeah. And I think in our culture too, particularly I think for women who are really in their masculine and sort of in the, again, the Carl Jung, like internal
Yeah,
archetypal masculine and archetypal feminine, these energies that belong to all of us. And ideally we would have a balance between our feminine and our masculine. But I think for a lot of women who go out in the world and get really overextended in their masculine, sort of in a corporate structure or in a
yeah,
sort of coded male environment, it's like you learn how to dissociate too.
yeah.
And I feel like I've had to work hard on getting back to my feelings and to not, take a Kleenex and try and make myself stop crying. I find it very difficult now to cry.
Really, that's so interesting. So it's actually you almost trained yourself to become something else that you're not.
Yeah, like more armored, more more defended, I think probably. I'm sure some of it is I don't know what it is. And it's not that I'm not moved, but I find it
No,
harder and harder to express that really openly and easily.
I can understand that and explain that because basically you've created a coping mechanism. So you created a pattern in your network, a mind and body network that was how you would survive in those environments, and you had to do it a lot. So it's a habit that's driving you. So you're going to have to literally deconstruct that and reconstruct that. And
Yeah.
that's these things that drive us, and that's what's kind of happening there, which
Yeah.
is it shows you how much we adapt, and it's good to adapt and change, but not good to change who we are. And that's, you've actually hit like almost like a really important point there, that when we have these rules that we're supposed to be like whatever, and we lose our uniqueness, look how much distortion it creates and how much damage it can create and the kind of backlash that it has.
Yeah.
as you describe in your own life. I'm sure that was quite surprising for you to notice that change in yourself.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's once you start this work, it's interesting. When I pitched this book and started working on it, I thought I would just be acting as a cultural therapist and sort of doing what I do on my podcast and asking the questions and sourcing where these things began in our culture and our thinking. And that I'd be able to just write it being removed from it myself. And my editor was like, you have to write yourself into this and relate to these sins if you're going to hold people's hands and bring them through the material as well.
Mhm.
And it was great advice, I think, to sort of,
Very good.
yeah, use myself as an example, because my stories are not exceptional, as I think so many of us find. We share the same stories, or that we
Yeah.
share the same notes, and that's so deeply moving, I think, and such an important part of being human. Even though we're always trying to
Yeah.
distinguish ourselves, it's like, no, actually, most of us we're very alike, and we have a lot of the same stories. But yeah, she had me write myself into the book to pull the reader through. And so I had to go through this process as well. And it's very confronting to realize, oh, I'm not as self-authored as I thought. And I don't know where this thought came from. I don't know why I am performing this particular role. I think I'm doing it out of fear, right? Or this
Mm.
desire for approval or
Yeah.
desire for control or whatever it is. I don't think this is, to use your words, this isn't me. This isn't you at your
Mm.
most essential.
No, and it requires a complete shift in society. I mean, this is a major societal shift that is required to free people into being themselves. And we're
Yeah.
seeing little dribbles of it. We're seeing more of it every day, but it's still, I mean, your book has been really well received and became a New York Times bestseller and everything, which just shows you that you've definitely hit the zeitgeist. People want to change. And I love that you talk about, awareness being the first step with your workbook, because that is, until we actually can be aware, we can't self-regulate. But there's also so much out there about awareness. But if we're just aware and all these thoughts come up, but you don't have a plan to deal with that, you need to reconceptualize. It has to be followed with the action. So that's great that you brought the workbook out, because I think what you've done with your book is you've generated the awareness.
Oh,
And now with your workbook, you've got the tool to take the awareness to another level.
oh,
And you mentioned as well how even doing the work for yourself, and as I listened to you and read your book and that kind of thing, you start realizing, my goodness, I actually did have that belief system. I mean, I don't know
mhm.
how many times we go somewhere, and my husband he's our CEO, but he also travels with me, do a lot of conferencing and things. People in hotels, in airports, they'll come up and they'll turn to Mac and they'll say, "Hi, Dr. Leaf." Automatically assume that the male is the one who's the doctor. And he hates that. So he always says, no, 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 she's the doctor, I'm the experiment. And it immediately breaks the ice, which it works really well. But it just shows you that even there, they still will. And then
Yeah.
I remember talking at a conference once, and it was a kind of quite a sort of spiritual kind of conference, churchy. I think they were very conservative, because afterwards the people always come and comment at the book table, and some guy came up and said, "You know what my favorite thing about your talk was?" And I thought, oh, he's going to say something about the mind brain or something, because I always say a lot of stuff in my talks. And he said, "The fact that you submit to your husband." I thought, what gave you that idea? I don't submit to my husband. I mean, that thinking came through, and I thought, what did I say that made him think that? And he said it was knowing your husband came on the stage and introduced you, and he said that was you, and you were listening to him introduce you. You were submitting to him. I thought, okay, that's the last time he ever introduces me ever on any stage, because it gave, in that kind of environment, because it gave it activated one of these
Stories.
situations one of these stories that that you got to work, the woman works through the man, and the woman receives her. I mean, they came up with all these weird things. The woman receives her blessings through the man, and I mean, stuff that, what, my jaw was dropping. But shows you, it's just in every culture's
Yeah.
got its own kind of version of that. So it's
Yeah.
overarching across cultures, but every culture has its own.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've seen that with your research.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the part that's there for us to sort of do and work is, obviously we all want to change society and culture and make it, conform to the way that we think that things should be. And that's that's never going to happen.
No.
But we can change the way that we relate to the world. We recognize that.
Mm.
And we can also, one of the big impetuses for me was to change the way that I was reacting to other women, and or making them conform or judging
Mm.
them, or really taking all my envy and projecting it onto them, for getting
Yeah.
away with something I would never allow myself to do, for behaving in a way that I wouldn't ever, see myself doing, for having something that I wouldn't allow myself to even dream about having, all that undiagnosed envy, and which is, of course, is one of the 7 deadly sins. But I knew I needed, the part that I could do in terms of changing culture was to stop, become more aware of that. And then every time I have that tendency to say, what's happening here? Is there information in here for me? Because I have a feeling this is more about me than it is about her. And something that she's doing is showing me something that I don't want to see in myself. And if I can stop that, if I can catch that, I don't even like the word stop. If I can catch it, I can look at it and I can say, okay, what's happening here? And how do I use this? And how do I not do that?
I love that principle so much. It's something that I talk about so often in all my work and books, is that we can't see something like envy as bad, but yet it has been. It's bad.
Yeah.
It's not bad. It's information. And that's exactly what you've just said. It's bad if it consumes you, if you allow it to consume you and drive you, because it's going to create chaos. But if you see it as, oh, well, why? And be curious about it and then get the data from that improves you, that's so powerful.
Well, I don't know if this has been your experience too, but what happened with me is that I thought envy is so gross and I would never be envious of anyone else. I mean, never. Gross. And so I had to start a step away from it and use, who am I sort of judging? Who am I criticizing? Who am I making bad because they're making me feel bad or uncomfortable? And then I had to use that to source, oh, there's envy here, actually. This person wants something or is doing something that I want this person has something I want or is doing something I want. And because I don't know how to look at it, I'm making them bad for making me feel bad. But some people might have a closer relationship out of the gate with their envy. I didn't. I would have sworn up and down and sideways that I never was envious of anyone, ever. Never.
Well, we weren't allowed to say you envy. You grew up in a culture that says you mustn't say you're envious. It's a bad thing. Meanwhile, it's information. And if you deny it, it's not going to go away. It's just going to get bigger and blow up in your face and in the way you function. So it's so important to see it as data and find out what's the data, what's the information in there for me, which is so good. I love this. Okay, tell us about the workbook, because that's newly released, isn't it? The workbook?
August 26th. It's called Choosing Wholeness Over Goodness. And whereas a lot of people do workbooks, I think when my editor asked me to do this, she thought she was expecting more or less a journal full of blank pages with some really good prompts. And no, we delivered like 300 pages of just intensive material. But it's really fun, and it would be fun to do with a group of friends because you can help each other identify your stories. It's full of it has this process that we take you through in each sin. And then it also has tools at the end, shift move tools at the end of each chapter for ways to sort of rethink your relationship to your body, for example, in the gluttony chapter, or ways to think about money in the chapter on greed. And I've been interviewing people like you and experts for a decade now. So I've learned a lot, and I tried to distill as much as I could into.
That's fantastic. Well, congratulations.
Thank
that sounds
you.
like something that everyone needs. Now, where can people get hold of you? Obviously, that book's available wherever books are sold. It's on pre-order currently. So where else can people find out more about you?
So my podcast is Pulling the Thread, and I write a Substack by the same name. It's under eliseloehnen.substack.com, and I am on Instagram at Elise Lunan as well.
Perfect. That's great. We'll put all those links in the show notes. And thank you once again. It's been such a enlightening, delightful discussion about such an important topic.
Thank
It's going to
you.
free so many people. Thank you.